Just we're live streaming now. Hello, I'm John from Broadsheet. You're very welcome. This is a mother and baby home report update, and it's been a big day. We're joined by mother and baby home activists Breda Murphy, Union Duffy, and Frank Breheny. Good evening, everyone.
Hi there.
Evening, John.
We'll get straight into it. Breda, it's been quite a day. The redress scheme was announced by Roderick O'Gorman. You got the news this morning?
We got the news initially on Friday to say that this week the redress proposals would be brought forward to Cabinet. And then on Monday, we got an email to say it would happen on Tuesday. So all morning, survivors were texting and ringing and saying, when can we expect this? So ordinarily, I thought, around lunchtime, we'd have it like 12:30, 1 o'clock. And then it was dragging on. So it was really 2:30. But around 1:30, 1:45, we got an email which specified various details, not the entire package. And we were directed afterwards to a site. And of course, as people began to read, they began to mingle and speak to one another over social media. And it was clear from the outset that people were unhappy, while the government and the minister said, he didn't intend or didn't wish to cause any harm, and that's why he was having a non-adversarial process, so that each person who had been in the home for any length of time, other than children who were there for less than 6 months, that all of the others would qualify for some payment, and some would qualify up to 34,000 they imagined to come forward. Some would qualify for an enhanced medical card. So of course that raised a flag straight away, because it means that certain children are excluded from it. And then there was the added part, which really fits with our people, because they were boarded out, and their boarding out experiences. Many people have heard of the Tuam survivors, and their experiences have been horrific. They were at the foundation of the state, 1925, and they tended to be boarded out for the monetary value and for the enslavement, working on farms at age 4 and 5. So that is not at all considered. So again, that's a real lapse by government, and it's orchestrated. I mean, when you see Conor O'Mahony and Conal O'Flaherty, who are well versed, and I've only seen them just before I came on here, when you see them speak out to say this is wholly inadequate, and to my mind, it's an insult to many, many survivors who've provided testimony, who've courageously gone forward, and who now feel like this is a slap in the face. It is completely reprehensible. It's unacceptable. And I've said that this evening on Drive Time. I'll say it on Prime Time. We have members joining on a Zoom this evening at 8 o'clock. So I'm taking their opinions, and their words will carry on RTE airwaves and tomorrow throughout the national or local airwaves, because it needs to be addressed. We cannot accept it.
What were you expecting, Breda? What were your members expecting?
I think they were expecting to be believed. All along the government have said that we believe you, but everything they have done has been to disbelieve them. And the Conor O'Mahony has pointed out in particular that he has studied various forms of this, and the fact that the abuse within the care of the state, when they were boarded out, and we know of the most appalling case being that of Grace, the child who was born in a mother and baby home in Cork to a mother of age 17 and her boyfriend, who were very much a couple. Grace was conceived in love at a time when Ireland should have been able to open its heart in 1978, and was born by a forceps delivery and was injured at birth, and then placed for adoption as her mother thought. And unfortunately, she remained in the care of the state, where the state placed her in a completely inappropriate setting, where she was the subject of abuse for 20 years. When John McGuinness spoke about that in Dáil Éireann, I rang him afterwards. I mean, I'm in tears about cases like this, because the government failed to realise these are real people. these are, our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, they're our family. And we need to regard them not as the other, but as our own people. And we need to be strong and united, and I think stand firm in the face of such inadequate response from government.
Union and Frank, actually, can I just go to Frank because it does affect you directly? Because Union is in a Northern Ireland situation. Frank, your first thoughts today, were you following it?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I feel deeply, deeply sorry tonight for the mother and baby home community. I have seen comments through the day that reflects that very genuine despair and disappointments. The government has learned nothing, absolutely nothing. Despite all the consultations, they've learned nothing. They have packaged a scheme in some nice PR, which frankly is not fit for purpose. I've looked at the compensation table. The compensation is derisory. The loss of earnings is just unbelievable. I actually don't know how they've calculated this. So, for example, the minimum that you can get for loss of earnings is €1,500, right up to €60,000. And if you look at it at its maximum, say, for example, and I use 11 years for a reason, and you'll understand why in a minute. But say somebody who was in the institutions for a period of 11 years, they would get €60,000, and that equates to €5,500 for each year. Now, you compare that to the calculations I've been doing for my grandmother, based on proper commercial rates, proper analysis. And for the first 11 years, if you bring those values up to present day values, but for the first 11 years of her, shall we say, institutional working life, that brings her figure is €8,000 plus per annum. So there's a heck of a divide, a gap there that I don't quite understand. The actual construction, we hear that there's €800 million.
Yeah, isn't that it though? They have a ceiling, so therefore they just can they've just divvied out from the 800. I mean, it's a bizarre way to do it.
It is bizarre, particularly when you think that even they talk about 34,000 potential claimants. But if we round it off and say 30,000 claimants at, say, an average of €8,000, that comes to €240 million. So what exactly is the rest for? Surely the rest can't be going to be used for the construction of the overseers of this scheme, or indeed the creation of memorialization, or indeed, sort of a museum, if you like, of these terrible events. I can't see how they're going to use all that money. And then there is the exclusions, excuse me, the exclusions. And Breda has touched on it, the children and the adoptees, which I dare say we'll hear more about. But then there's the bizarre statement within his own release on the government website, which simply says that, yes, if somebody has died, then, the relatives can claim monies in lieu. But the person has had to have died from the 31st of January 2021. So, there's another category of people for whom financial justice is certainly not available. And then there is, of course, the waiver. I don't understand quite why the government is putting a waiver in, because if the government is confident of these figures that they've set out in their table, it surely wouldn't bother them if somebody took them to court, because they'd be so confident that they say, well, yes, the government has got this right. And then you've got other things like, in recent days, there's been severe UN criticism of the burials bill. And here we see in this particular package, they're going to plow on regardless. There's
Absolutely regardless.
absolutely no interaction at all with the voices, the many voices that are out there.
Yeah.
And I conclude by saying quite simply that this, to me, from my perspective, from a legal perspective, has the fingerprints of a legal a group action claim mindset.
Yeah.
But this is the way it's been constructed. It's a missed opportunity. They will come to regret this, and it will lead, I regret to say this, and we know that there's cases coming up tomorrow in the next 2 days about the Mother and Baby Home Commission report. But this redress scheme will definitely lead to further legal challenges, be they judicial reviews, or perhaps, who knows, there may be some lawyer out there in the Republic of Ireland who will say, do you know what, I'm going to step in and I'm going to help the victims and survivors of this, because
and take it to Europe,
Well, yeah, if the UN are raising human rights issues about the construction of what they're doing, you can bet your bottom euro that there are people out there who are going to be saying, this is not right, this is breaching my European Convention rights, and they will take it all the way once they've exhausted the remedies in the Republic. But it's simply, John, it's simply not fit for purpose.
No. On the burials aspect, Breda, your members must be devastated about this as well. It's the same, they're just going ahead with this burials bill, which has nothing to do with these bodies. These bodies of, there is a process and a procedure there for them to be interred and to be raised.
And I sat across from the minister in Tuam, and I said, if you dismiss the role of coroner, if you dismiss the role of Galway County Council, then it is a flawed process. And just as Frank often says, it will lead to judicial reviews, it will lead to clogging up the courts, and it will lead to a lengthier time frame. And I knew he didn't have to answer me. He didn't answer me. I knew by his face that the agency was being appointed. And you see, the agency will not respond ultimately to even the Public Accounts Committee. Just like the commissioners walked away, they will walk away. And in the dock will be whoever is the minister and the government. These boys that are sitting on those seats today will have walked away. And that's part of the problem. They will walk away with the fat pension, despite the fact that they've caused unnecessary trauma. One of our members said she was so re-traumatized by this, thinking on behalf of both her mother, who's still alive, and who, for all the trauma she endured and her life in the interim, will only receive 5,000, and that she herself was misregistered or not registered correctly. So her legal case is one that she must pursue through the courts. And I would really advocate for that, because it's not accommodated here.
Just on the legal point, sorry, Union, I'll come to you in a second. Frank, on the legal point, the waiver, is that legal? Can you?
I don't think.
Frank,
Frank, what do you think? I don't think it's legal.
You can introduce. You can introduce. Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, sorry.
Hello. We can hear you.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry. You can, in any agreement, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a contract or a government paper, you can introduce whatever you like. And when you look at the waiver, basically they're saying, well, you can effectively, summarizing, you, the survivors of the mother and baby home institutional abuse, can take it or leave it, basically. And I think this is, it's morally repugnant in many respects, because it's putting vulnerable people in a very difficult situation. It doesn't matter for somebody, say, like me. I would make my decision accordingly. Yeah. But I think for a lot of the people that Breda is talking about, this is difficult stuff to digest. And in my opinion, I only wished I had been part of the process, that I was actually in the room, because believe you me, I would have called the lawyers out about this waiver. You know, it's quite simple. You're confident of your figures, you've put it in a table, you've no need to put a waiver in this. And it's like a red rag to a bull. It's demonstrating that they're not confident of their own position.
Of course, but it doesn't stop anybody from independently going through the courts.
No, not at all. No,
no matter what they say. I mean, that's their proviso, though, is it?
Sorry?
Is that their proviso for the waiver?
It's the proviso. If you go to court, you can't use this scheme.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say go for the scheme and then sue them as well.
Well, I mean, I have known in the past, in totally different scenarios, where that has happened. Say, for example, where people sign waivers with corporations, and then they go and sue, and of course the company will say, well, you signed this waiver, and they try to make the argument for the court, but the courts look at the justice of the agreements and the levelness, if you like, of the different parties. And there are instances where the courts have actually said, well, no, you can't rely on your waiver, you can't rely on this NDA or whatever it is that's been set up, and they've essentially got the parties back into court and redecided what the levels of compensation should be. I mean, ridiculous levels of compensation. I couldn't believe what I was reading.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that, but some good news today, Ewan, from Northern Ireland, are fine words at least.
Yes, John. Yeah. First of all, can I just basically say that as a victim survivor from the poor relation in Ireland, in other words, the 6 counties, that I am absolutely disgusted and dismayed for all of the people affected here, because I mean, these people are basically treading quicksand and have been for a very, very long time, and this is the type of stuff that basically completely demoralizes people and will put some people into a dark place that they'll not recover from. Because I mean, even the Oaks consultancy thing that Frank referred to earlier on there back in March, I mean, some kind of an appeasement that was luring people into a false sense of security. We're actually going to go from the commission and the fact that people were discredited and we don't believe you, to actually leading people to think, you know what, we're going to take on board what you're telling us. But what the Irish government done today basically says, they laughed in people's faces and they says, see all that Oaks consultancy stuff? Sorry guys, I mean, we couldn't take that on board. We're just going to do whatever we want here. And if you're feeling any pain now, you know what, we're not going to give you any morphine. We're just going to compound the pain as best we possibly can. So, you know, there's no chance of any wounds being healed here. There's no scars over any wounds, because if the wounds are open and you compound the misery and the pain and you rub salt in the wounds, I mean, they get infected. And fortunately, a lot of these people will not be able to shout from the rooftops about this. As I say, this completely brings people into complete despair. But yeah, in terms of the North,
at least you've got the South to say, look, we can't do it that way. You know, at least you can say, look, in the Republic, they just made a balls of the whole thing and delayed it and deliberately delayed it and whatever. You know, at least.
Yeah, but when these people have faced the type of prevarication and obfuscation and denial and all of these things that we could all talk about, run off the top of your tongue, so long now, in the way that the tube site has been treated, basically should have been sealed off as a crime scene. I mean, if you or I were to find a body in our garden tomorrow, you would have the full rigours of the police surrounding the place, sealing the place off, you know, police tape everywhere, everybody getting hauled in over the coals and interrogated about what's going on. And it's absolutely staggering to think that hundreds and hundreds of people, and it's probably an indefinite number. There's no way of actually ascertaining how many babies there are, potentially some women as well. You just don't know. So, yeah, but in terms of the North, we had an announcement from the Northern Ireland Executive yesterday, which basically signed off and affirmed that they were going to implement all of the recommendations of the recent recovery report that was delivered on the 5th of October. But I'm trying to keep my feet on the ground, John, to be honest with you, because I mean, today is the best example of why you should not believe anything you're told by governance, you know. So while some people there are, you know, putting their hopes up, I'm being a wee bit more measured. And when I see the detail of what's next and all of the different mechanisms, I mean, some questions weren't answered yesterday, they couldn't tell us. And that's not unusual either. So yes, they said all the right things in the assembly, and everybody is latching onto that big time. But unfortunately, a lot of hopes are being extremely well built up now, and it's some.
Really can tell you.
Yeah. Some people will look at what happened in the north yesterday, and people are already comparing what's going on in the south of Ireland, you know. But I would just temper this a wee bit and just say, listen, we don't know the detail yet, so let's see what happens over the next few months. But yeah.
Well, another thing that occurred since we were off, Kathleen Corliss was on the Late Late Show, and they had a ceremony for the children under the interred. It seemed kind of ghoulish because the skeletons are still, the remains are still in the ground. It seemed very just very weird. I don't know if anybody saw that in the Late Late.
Yeah, there was a lantern. I don't know if you're talking about
the lantern thing,
where they had walked from. This is their second year doing that, and I suppose to reflect shining a light, I suppose, is what they're trying to do on the darkness that is within Tuam, where the remains are. And there's a really applicable photograph of Catherine with the minister when he arrived on the site. And she showed him around the site. And one of the perplexing things is that, you know, the government or the studios who were RTE and Virgin Media were present, and they didn't really question the minister or even focus on the fact that the spot where he was walking is actually where the remains are. And I know that they could have put a question to him that would cause him to kind of think, you know, this is a sacred space. Yeah. This is the space that needs to be, those remains were the unburied dead, and they need to be rescued and recovered from there. So I would have liked if our media, I mean, to be honest, John, I'm quite frustrated, although I'm on RTE today and News Talk, and oh my God, a host of, you know, Tip FM are very good to us. I have to say, U105 are very good. And Clem Ryan, who's in Kildare, is really, really good too. But some of the state media disregard us at times. And maybe it's because we challenge. Maybe it's because, you know, Ewan speaks with a very strong voice, and I try to do the same. And Frank speaks from experience, from his grandmother's experience, and you can't discount that. But I'm disappointed because locally, I rarely speak on Galway Bay FM. I'm rarely invited to speak. I set up interviews, but I think it's applicable because much of the anecdotal evidence I have is actually within this area, and it relates to Tuam. And at this point, I think the only manner and the only way to get that out there is just to do what Frank is doing and has completed, is to write a book and write the experiences of people who left this world too soon, whose life experiences and whose memories, and who perhaps did not spend time in Tuam, but have memories of what happened there. They are equally important. And maybe it's time that I just put them to paper and, you know, give them a voice in that way, because we're not going to get it otherwise.
No. And time is not on their side, you know. It's
not on my side either. I'm an old lady now too, but you know, we're all
Pile your wish, Murph. Pile your wish.
We're all getting on, and I do. You know, nobody knows.
Well, the average age would be over 70, wouldn't it, for the survivors?
Yeah, I'll tell you one story, John, that that I heard only recently. Now, it may be considered anecdotal, but actually the lady who tells it, it's her memory. Her friends, and one of them is still alive, and I would actually know her quite well. She would be in her 90s now. And they sat in the back of the priest's car, and each of them had on their lap a child going to Shannon. And it was the routine in this particular area, which is not very far from Tuam, that if a girl was going to the States, that the church authorities would then pay part of that fare. And if you remember in the 1950s, the fares were very, very high.
Yeah.
So of course, and the girls who left, who immigrated, and some were in institutions themselves previously, because that book called The House Children documented their experiences in both Tuam and in Ballinasloe. So they thought they were doing the best thing for the child. And so they took the child on their lap to the United States. And we saw on the documentary, The Missing Children, that monies changed hands. And in one case, the monies that changed hands was the equivalent of a salary, an annual salary for a man who was employed earning around 5,000 per year. He earned just over 5,000, but the fee paid for that child, according to the mother who never lied, she told Kathy, her daughter, adopted daughter from Tuam, that they had paid 5,000, the equivalent of 5,000 pounds. What was that? What is that today? Like, is that 60,000? Because I'm not an actuary.
Well, that would be like a maybe no, around about 40,000.
Yeah.
A good
The
chunk.
average wage, the average industrial wage.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, about 38,000, I think, or 35,000. So, just on the, there's no. I mean, there's one voice, isn't there, about the coroner? I mean, there's no among the survivor groups, Rita. Would that be right?
And among all the experts.
Okay,
and,
so
you know, the human rights, the civil liberties. Absolutely everybody, the ombudsman, everybody who has any inkling of what is true and fair and just. The coroner's role is pivotal.
Yeah.
It's pivotal for the sites in Northern Ireland. It's pivotal for any site where human remains are found, regardless.
Okay, hypothetically, if I found bones in Frank's garden, for instance.
I believe know what you're doing in his garden.
I mean, I would go to the police then and say, look, I've seen these bones. Or no, say even I found them in a park, you know, just a Phoenix Park or something. I found bones. I'd call the police, they would cordon it off. They would dig, they would bring up the bones. If there was a huge, like if there was a tomb down there, they'd still bring up those bones, right?
Yes,
immediately.
Yeah.
Within like days of it being discovered.
And a state pathologist would be called in.
Exactly. And then I suppose
a post-mortem would be carried out.
Yeah, and then an inquest.
And then inquest opened, all of the kind of normal things that we would expect to happen.
But what's to stop me from going to Tuam police station and say, okay, look, there's bones under there, and I think those people, some of them might have even been murdered. You know, they might be left to starve. I'd like to report this. Would you be able to?
I think any individual could take themselves off to the Garda station and make such complaints. It would be interesting to see what the Garda reaction would be.
We've done it. We've done it. We've been there.
Yeah, I know it's been done, but it's kind of just to illustrate that any citizen could go. It doesn't have to be a survivor. It could be an outraged citizen who's been following this. I mean, I've had texts during the day from people who are not connected with this, and they are outraged. They're more outraged than I am about this, but they could take themselves off to the Garda station and make such complaints. But let's not forget all of the list of people that Breda came out there with a minute ago calling for the role of the coroner, local coroners, in fact, to be implemented in this. There's another body that's been forgotten, and that's the United Nations. So, I mean, we're all in good company
Yes.
It's just that the government is not listening.
But the thing is, they're also impervious. It's funny, they're impervious to the UN. I mean, Catherine Zipon would have bent over backwards for the UN. As we know, she wanted to join them. And yet, you know, they could just blithely ignore the UN rapporteur who was...
I think if I was a minister of state in the Irish Republic and I'd received a letter on my desk from the United Nations, I'd be filled with such shame and embarrassment. I'd either resign because I couldn't agree to the collective responsibility of cabinet, or I'd do something about it.
She did neither.
And seemingly neither is happening.
Yeah. Sorry, Brita.
You see, I wondered about, you know, in one way I thought when Minister O'Gorman, Roderick O'Gorman, took over, that because he had a background in law and because he understood the significance of the return of human remains and the importance of that, and, you know, the citizenship attached, the state responsibility, that he would move. And even Dr. Niamh McCullough, who is the chief archaeologist who was in the site, who explained at the time that we're just covering up those remains for the 6-month period. We cannot guarantee that they are, you know, then usable from the point of view of DNA. And we're now 4 years on. So you have to wonder, is it orchestrated so that DNA is not extractable at the time when they do eventually do that dig? I mean, I think, and we did go to the Gardaí. Many of us have gone to the Gardaí, including Michael Byrne, who came over recently with a massive file. I mean, when you're talking to anybody from America, one of the things that they have done is that those mothers and fathers who adopted the children kept every snippet of information, right down to the clothes that the children wore on their first journey, or what food they ate. They've documented, and you're documenting, you know, 63 years ago, absolutely everything. So we went to the Gardaí with that, and I understood that statements would be taken. We've gone a few times, and it's not quite a statement. It's more or less a talk, a look through, and a copy of our documentation. In fact, they still have much of mine. But it leads me to believe that this is a tick box exercise instigated by Drew Harris on behalf of government. Yet we're told, you know, the police is separate, and the judicial system, but we have seen that there have never been any criminal charges brought where there should have been, and there are certainly cases for it, and children have died in circumstances that are suspicious, to say the least. So I think that the government need to grow a pair, and they need to seize all documentation within diocesan offices, because when you expect a survivor to come forward and take a case, as Frank has just said earlier, that survivor is asked for their documentation, and many of them do not have it because it was never given to them. And looking for it is like looking for a needle in a haystack. So, Ewan, you'd agree, I'm sure.
Absolutely, Brita. I mean, even some of the terms of this redress scheme that O'Gorman has announced today, I mean, it's absolutely staggering. It's if it wasn't so serious, it would be laughable. You know, the information is absolutely, in many cases, impossible because so many people have gaps in their information here. There's only a certain amount of information that you'll get from a state. There's other information that will be put into place then by the institutions, and good luck in getting that. So, you know, his basically says that people don't need to produce any evidence then. Well, they don't, because it's going to be another issue when you think of the institutions on the record keeping that is usually so meticulous but conveniently disappears. So how are you going to establish a full term of tenure in one of these institutions when your only evidence might be the evidence that's held by the institutions themselves? So how much credibility is going to be put in place then? And even the way this redress scheme's been set up, I mean, Roderick O'Gorman would have been safer saying, I'll tell you who's going to be eligible for this rather than who's not going to be eligible, because it would be a shorter list. It's absolutely staggering. And I'm actually interested. I was talking to Frank about this today. I'm wondering, because these two redress schemes have been set up virtually concurrent in the north and south, I mean, how are they going to work out because of the extensive trafficking between the two states? There's a lot of people that are potentially going to be eligible for redress in both states. So are we going to see another waiver NDA say, well, if you apply to a redress scheme in the north, you're not applying down here, and vice versa? I mean, it'll be interesting to see what collaboration is going to be between the two states on that. Because there's no way, I cannot see any situation where they're going to allow a dual application to redress schemes in both states.
Yeah, and you'll find that they'll be evenly matched as well financially, I'd say, you know.
Well, I don't know, John. I mean, we haven't drilled down into the detail, but I mean, we've certainly proposed a minimum standard payment of £10,000 for a redress scheme that gets up and going as soon as possible. So that's not going to be dependent on the outcome of any kind of investigation. So,
and that's an interim payment, Ewan. It's an interim payment which will be deducted from the final amount. So I think that was one of the good things to come out.
Yeah, that was, yeah. Sorry, that's like a without prejudice amount. It's kind of,
yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah, wasn't it? I mean, that's nothing as created in Roderick's statement today. Frank, your mum was in the 11 years. Was that at Hyde Park and the laundry there?
It was my grandmother.
Sorry,
no, it's okay. Don't worry.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, she was in Hyde Park for 41 years.
But the 11 you were discussing the 11 years and saying that.
Yeah, it's just that I've been curious about the kind of money that the women produced for these institutions, and I've been fortunate enough to be introduced to the Republic's past census of production, and I can see the value that women were producing back in 1927 through to 1935. And I was curious about the kind of earnings that she would achieve. And
8,000 a year, was it, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, on the basis of the commercial rates that I was looking at, and they're not incorrect. But the basis of the commercial rates at present day values, she would have been for the first 11 years. It would over 11 years, it would started off at maybe €6,000 and then increase up to maybe €10,000 or something like that a year. But the average for the 11 years for each year is €8,000 a year.
Yeah.
But then for the remainder 30 years. As we get into the really into the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and early 70s, then exponentially the rate or the commercial rate for that work would increase accordingly. So,
but the maximum they have, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's things like loss of pension, and then there's the disease factor that I've also been looking at. The high, what appears to be the high incidence of cancer rates in Magdalen Laundry women by comparison to the general population. So, when you look at it the way that I'm looking at it in granular detail, and you see this pitiful table in terms of compensation that's been offered to the women, the survivors of these terrible institutions, I can just see the hands of insurance lawyers or insurance lawyer types at the hand of this, nudging the government minister to say that this is the correct way to do it. You don't want to recreate or set a different precedent, because we've got other things coming up down the line. Or whatever, but it is difficult. This story is not going away.
No.
By any means at all. And
are you watching? Are you following the Canadian? What's happening in Canada? Just in terms of
I mean,
they're bringing the body, but they bring the bodies up immediately and finding
that is correct. But there's also been a bit of what appears to be a bit of backtracking by the Canadian government on some of the issues that they said they would deliver and they're not delivering. And Trudeau didn't, turn up to certainly one event because he'd gone on a holiday. I mean, goodness me, politicians apparently come from the community we live in. I'm not sure that they were born. They were probably quarried, but that's probably as far as I can go with that. But, the issue is that there is there's a very unified survivor community in Canada.
Well, the public seems shocked, less shocked, more
shocked.
Yeah,
they are indeed, but it is the unity of the survivor community in Canada that really stands out for me. If the Canadian government doesn't deliver on its promises, believe you me, they'll be shamed into it by the Indigenous survivors. No,
at least they've brought the bodies to the surface. Which my point about the Kathleen Corliss thing, I got a book. I haven't even started yet, but she was on the Late Late and the Lanterns and everything. But the outrage isn't there. I mean, not that Kathleen should get outraged, but how is it that 4 or 5 years after they're still
7
there?
years.
7 years. 7 years.
I mean, I was in Tuam recently. I actually managed to get over to Ireland, and I took myself down to the site there in Tuam. I went down on my own. I wanted to be on my own, and it is probably one of the most profound experiences I think I ever had. And you begin to realize as you walk around, because, apart from all of the children who are not just within that small plot of green, but apparently under the children's playground, where there were no children. There were no children playing there at all. Right. And then up on the other side of where I was this huge wall. I didn't even know what it was until I went back over to look at it. And it is the surviving wall of the actual institution. And on there's a huge plaque, mostly in Gaelic, but it is a plaque to 6 anti-treaty soldiers who were executed by pro-treaty forces. And I just looked around and I thought, this is a place of death. This is a terrible, terrible place. And yet there appears to be reluctance in the chattering political and media classes in the Republic, an indifference that, to use the phrase I used a short while ago, is morally repugnant.
Yeah,
I just don't understand it.
I agree with you because I don't know. I can't imagine any other country in the world who would behave in this manner as if.
No.
Oh, I think there's precedents of other countries who've behaved in that manner.
Well,
whether you look at Colombia or, Rwanda or.
But I mean, in terms of the, yes, of course. I mean, all the Pol Pot and all the yes, but I mean, I suppose in a functioning democracy, in a functioning republic, you expect.
You would expect a great deal more. You could, can you understand this kind of thing? But. In a country that is riven by strife and war, trying to recover and create institutional systems to deal with these issues is perhaps their only saving grace. But nonetheless, they do. They have the same themes, if you like. You can see it actually within some of the European Court of Human Rights cases. Where family members have sought to deal with bodies in mass graves. And I will say, I mean, we've said this previously, the three of us have put in an alternative draft burials bill to the Oireachtas. And we've also done a compare and contrast on the bill itself, but also on the Oireachtas committee that had, sort of looked into this. But you have a problem, and it is an institutional problem, when members of the Oireachtas Committee, referred to places like Tuam and Bessborough as communal graves. There's nothing communal about those places of death. They are mass graves. And the Oireachtas Committee said there's no evidence to help us define or decide what is a mass grave or what constitutes a mass grave. We produced, I think it was something like 14 links to academic papers that demonstrates what the definition is, and definitely Tuam and Bessborough and other places in the north, south, it doesn't matter where it is on the island of Ireland.
Well, Union knows that, sorry.
They constitute the definition of mass grave.
Yeah, well, Union knows how, and we all know, and Breda as well, how much the disappeared are mentioned or are given political, clout, in Northern Ireland and in the Republic. This is IRA victims who were taken from their homes or whatever, and were never found. There's at least another 900 in Bessborough of these children.
1,024 in Shanross Abbey. Like there is a memorial garden there, but it's unclear how many are there, and the sisters could not add to anything to help the commission identify where the remains were. I think it's because it has happened in our living lifetime, in memory right now for survivors, that it is so painful, and many are going to their grave with justice denied, and that's the saddest thing of all of this. We're losing them, and we really need to do better as a community, as a country, and we can do better. I'm disappointed in the rhetoric from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and I feel they hold the balance of power at the cabinet table, and so perhaps O'Gorman fought a little more. I don't know, but certainly right now what is available to us is completely, in my book, unacceptable.
Do you think it will be rejected? I mean, if the survivor group's rejected, then that's the...
You see, the problem with that, the commission's...
Not to reject it, but to ask them to amend it to...
Yeah, we asked them to amend the commission's report. It wasn't accepted by anybody, and look what happened.
Yeah.
They did the same with the McAleese inquiry, and they placed all of the evidence required for the McAleese inquiry in the Taoiseach's office. It has never seen the light of day. This is with all the evidence for the mother and baby home inquiry is with the minister, and that is unlikely to see the light of day for 30 years. So how can they stand over it? I mean, anybody can make an allegation, but we're expected as representative of survivor groups to always produce evidence when in fact we are stopped from getting that evidence.
Rita, I know you've got a bigger audience to face later, and so I don't want to keep you. But will you tell me the survivors that you spoke to today, or just generally, have they given up? Do they kind of go, Rita, I don't really...
No. They've got a fighting spirit. That's why they want to meet. That's where I'm going now at 8 o'clock. We have them coming in from the United States, from the UK, and all around Ireland, and they have the bit between their teeth. They are not giving up, and where one of them is actually in hospital at the moment, our family member is coming in for her. So they are that exercise that they are not taking this lying down. And that's why I want to speak to them tonight, because I'm representative of their voices and on prime time later on. And I just want to ensure that what I say is reflective of what they want.
You're an amazing advocate. And Frank, when's the book on your grandmother coming out?
Well, hopefully early in 2022. It's now coming in close to the end of the final edit, so that's a great achievement, he says. But can I just say, whatever about my story, I think what Roderick O'Gorman and the Irish governments and the religious orders have failed to understand is that every single victim and survivor was born an Irish citizen. Yeah. And every one of those victims who have died, be they an adult or a child in the ground, died as Irish citizens. And when you read everything that is published by the Irish government on this issue, there is no sense, I feel no sense that they recognize the importance of that status, the Irish citizen status, and what that means in terms of individual and indeed collective rights. And that, I have to say, is something that Roderick O'Gorman and the Irish government should reflect upon very seriously in the coming days. And if they don't take action based on the pressure that the survivor groups will bring, it will be very much to their shame. It'll be a lasting shame. And but it is something, unfortunately, which is often lost in the discussion about these terrible horrors that we all know about.
Union, any last thoughts?
I would probably take a more sort of cynical, strategic view to this, Sean, and I would say that all of these guys know exactly what this means. The government is circling the wagons, and none of these ministers are an independent entity. There's a government strategy on this, and they're all directed and they're told to toe a certain line.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what it's about. At the end of the day, the government will do all it can to protect its own reputation, its own status, the fact that a lot of people would potentially be criminalised on the back of what's happened here, and protect the public purse as well. Because unfortunately, that redress scheme today shows you how little they value human life. And to take away the actual trauma and the experiences themselves and put this down to your tenure in a particular institution is one of the most heinous insults that you can exact on a person, as far as I'm concerned.
Unspeakable. I meant to ask about the vaccine trials. Were they mentioned in the report at all? No. Compensation for that, for those. They didn't follow up on those trials, so they.
Yeah.
No, they don't.
John, I have to run. I'm sorry.
No, we're off. We're off. Thanks, Breda. And thank you very much, Ewan and Frank. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, John.
You're
We'll catch
welcome.
you
Sorry
soon.
for keeping